That diff just kicked in then, I felt it. We've got 860 kilos in the back of this vehicle. Bit of a wheel lift there to get through. Well, it's the latest versus the greatest. The Ford Ranger on this side, it's been the darling of the four-wheel drive segment since this generation model came out, but there's a new kid in town. The question is though, is it the new sheriff? This is the Kia Tasman. It's been making a lot of waves for a lot of reasons, not just about the looks, but about the performance and the interior. But the question is, does this ute have what it takes to knock over the champion in the segment? This isn't just the champion in terms of sales, by the way. This is a multi-year Drive Car of the Year winner and an overall winner at one stage there as well. So this is a very excellent four-wheel drive ute. It really redefined the ute segment in many ways. Can this do the same thing? Let's find out. The newcomer in this comparison is the Kia Tasman, and we've got the second from the top X-Line in this review. It's priced from $67,990 plus on-road costs. But Kia does have a drive-away deal offered on the Tasman at the time of recording this video, along with offers on the rest of the Kia range in Australia. This Tasman X-Line is listed at $70,990 in the traffic. The Ford Ranger that we have here is the mid-range XLT variant, which is fitted with the 2-litre 4-cylinder bi-turbo diesel engine, and it's got an RRP of $63,890 plus on-road costs. Now that is a clear price advantage for the Ford in this comparison. But when you look at drive-away prices for the XLT, it's a lot closer. You're looking at $70,601 for this Ranger XLT in the traffic. So that puts only a few $100s between these utes at the time of testing, even though the Ranger Sport, or Wild Track for that matter, is a little bit closer to the Tasman X-Line on equipment levels. Both of these utes have an optional paint colour at extra cost, but the Ranger also has some options fitted as well. There's a touring pack, for example, that adds in a 360-degree camera system with zone lighting and puddle lamps. You also get adjustable tie-down points in the tray, some extra towing technology features, and auxiliary switches on the roof. That all comes at the price of $1,750. And we've also got a manual roller cover fitted to our test Ranger in this review. Exterior features on the Ranger XLT include 17-inch alloy wheels, reflector-style LED headlights, LED fog lights and stop lights, side steps, a sports bar and auto wipers. The Ranger XLT also has a tow bar fitted as standard. Tasman X-Line has 18-inch alloy wheels on the outside, along with superior projector-style LED headlights. There's also LED fog lights and stop lights, just like the Ranger. However, the Tasman has no side steps or sports bar as standard fit, nor does it get a tow bar. That all comes at extra cost. So this is effectively meat and potatoes in the Ford Ranger lineup. This is XLT, this is the most popular model in the range, and it's not completely devoid of standard kit. Now what's most noticeable here is that the Ford Ranger XLT sticks with cloth seats with manual adjustment on the inside. The infotainment system is the smaller 10.1-inch size in this trim level, and that is matched to an 8-inch digital cluster in front of the driver. There's a 6-speaker sound system, leather wrapping for the steering wheel and shifter, and dual zone climate control. So no, it cannot compete with the Tasman pound for pound in terms of standard equipment. And I've got to say, this for a few years has been the benchmark of four-wheel drive ute interiors inside this Ranger, but I don't think that is the case anymore. Now that being said, it is still quite good overall. I like the amount of storage space you get around this area here because you do get a smaller screen in this XLT. When you move up a trim level or two, you get a larger screen, but it does eat into the room here. So a little bit of plus and minus there. Now this spec doesn't get a second glove box or the pop-out cup holders like you get in a Ranger Wild Track. It's a bit of a shame that it's missing here, but this storage shelf in front of the passenger is quite nice. Now these cloth seats in the Ranger, no, they're not leather, they're not faux leather, they don't have electric adjustment, they don't have heating or ventilation in this trim level. You need to spend more money for that. Now, in terms of comfort and adjustment, they're pretty good, they're okay. I'm not going to say they're excellent, they're not one of the best in the class, I don't think, but they're good enough. And you do get tilt and reach adjustment through the steering column, so getting in behind the wheel, it feels comfortable, it feels quite natural to drive, and you can spend big hours behind the wheel of this car and not get out feeling uncomfortable. So 10.1 inches isn't as big as what you get in the Tasman, and we are obviously in the portrait orientation here, which can be a little bit fiddly with smartphone mirroring and that sort of thing. We do have climate controls that are separate to the display further down, and you do have a volume control, which is really useful, but a lot of this screen is still taken up by some native controls here. So there is extra climate controls here, kind of doubling up, which I don't find really useful for the amount of screen you have. And there's a little bar at the top here as well, which is actually really useful for getting around to basic functions nice and quickly and easily. This infotainment system is quite simple, easy to use. I think it's fast to react as well, although we have noticed that Apple CarPlay connections can be a little bit dicky in previous testing, so that's one thing to keep in mind. So in total, I think this Ford Ranger interior is really good overall, but I think there's a new king in the segment in terms of interior space, comfort and technology. So if you're wondering about buying one of these Tasmans but you're worried about how it looks from the outside, my advice is just get in the thing, because number one, you can't see the car from the outside, and number two, you are greeted by an excellent interior. So this car is really resetting the benchmark for four-wheel drive utes in terms of quality, space and comfort, and I've got to say value for money as well at this top end of the ute segment. So let's start with materials, which is, I'm a bit worried about talking about materials in four-wheel drive utes because hard plastics have their place. I think they're durable, and these are commercial vehicles at the end of the day. We shouldn't forget that, but it would also be remiss of me not to mention it in comparison to the Ranger. The Ranger has more hard plastics on the inside. This has a few soft touch materials getting around, which people would really appreciate when you're spending upwards of $70,000 on a four-wheel drive ute. Don't forget that. It's very expensive by the time it's in the traffic. So I think you're getting a good sense of value for money in this Tasman. Now, talking about value for money, this Tasman is better equipped for the same kind of asking price. Let's have a look at some of those details. Seats in this Tasman X-Line are a good looking synthetic leather, and you also get heating up front and electric adjustment for the driver. There are 12.3-inch displays for the infotainment and the driver display, plus a small climate control display wedged in between the two. There's also paddle shifters, interior ambient lighting, twin wireless charging pads, a 6-speaker sound system and dual zone climate control. It's worth noting that this trim level also moves the gear shifter from the center up to a stalk on the steering column. So that charging spot here, it does work as a useful storage space as well for just your keys and your wallet. It's got a nice rubber bottom on it as well. It just feels quality. It does have a mixture of materials here that works well. The center console is pretty big. There's a 12-volt plug hiding in there, but also you've got this handy pop-out workbench. So maybe you don't use your power tools so much, you use a laptop when you're working. This would work quite well for that, or even a clipboard or something like that. It does work quite well. We've got a second glove box in front of the passenger here, nice little bit of storage space. It's not massive, but it is useful, I think. But overall, this just feels like the next generation step forward in terms of what you could expect out of a four-wheel drive ute in terms of the interior. Now, it would appear that the Tasman is on par with the Ranger in terms of power outlets up the front. You've got two USB-Cs here and a 12-volt there. The Ranger has a USB-C and a USB-A, but let's call that even. However, open up this little flap on the top of the dashboard here, and there's two more USB-C power outlets there. It's a sign of the times, I suppose. We are very power hungry these days. Could be an extra useful addition for something like a GPS mounted up on the windscreen, or even a dash cam or something like that. Really clever thinking by Kia. Now, these seats, yes, they are much better overall in terms of the standard fit, but they're more comfortable as well. We've got a bit more bolstering going on here. We do have nice adjustable under thigh support as well. We've got tilt and reach through the steering column. So this is a little bit more comfortable, I think, for the driver because these seats are better in this Tasman. Now, in terms of infotainment, this is similar to what you get in a lot of other Kia vehicles. So you've got a 12.3-inch screen here, and you've got the one of the same size in front of the driver. Plus, there's a small little 5-inch display here, which is a bit of extra control for your climate. Now, while you're driving, it's actually really hard to see because the hoop of the steering wheel is in the way. You tend to do this a little bit, but it is useful. You can use it for redirecting where the air is going, turning on your recirculation, doing the defog and all that sort of thing. It works well. And the infotainment system itself, it's pretty sharp, it works well. The operating system is fantastic, and it's not lacking for features either. So It's almost line ball between the two. I would probably say that this is a better infotainment system on the whole, and it does seem to be a little bit less buggy than the Ford system as well. So I would give the Tasman the win in terms of looking just at the infotainment. But overall, I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to see what this Tasman has done to the ute segment. The Ford Ranger used to be the best. It's not anymore. This is it. We always talk about the Ford Ranger being one of the larger utes in the segment, and that bringing a specific advantage into the second row in terms of space. Hang on to your hat, because the Kia's got even more advantage in that regard. But let's just do some testing here for comparison's sake. That's my driving position up front here. I'm around 1.8 meters tall overall. I do sit relatively close to the steering wheel. Now, if I sit here, I can get around one fist just grazing in front of my knee there to the driving position up front. My seating position is quite comfortable. I've got a bit of headroom there, that's quite good. The seat is perhaps slightly flat, but by ute standards, this is quite good. This is better than most other utes in this segment. Now, in terms of features and amenities, we've got air vents here, we've got a single 12-volt power plug, we've got a mat pocket on the back of these seats. Cloth seats continue on once again. And of course, you've got a drop-down armrest in the middle here with two cup holders. It's also worth mentioning that we do have some storage under the seat here at the moment, underneath my bum, which is really useful, and you can drop this backrest down as well to access a little bit of room and fit your child seats and that sort of thing. So there is a bit of versatility built into this Ranger, which is good. I think special mention must go to the design of the door handles in this Ranger, because it's a one-handed function. You can just pull the lever and open it. It works really well. You don't need to use one hand and then push with your elbow. It's a really clever design, and it absolutely works. I wonder why more car makers don't do it in this style. You can see where Kia has really looked at Ford and the Ranger in particular as the benchmark in the ute space and taken a lot of ideas away for the design of this Tasman. But they've also said, well, if you can do it, maybe we can do it, but better. Now, in terms of the under-seat storage in this Tasman, it's a really useful thing, but this, it's bigger. It's more spacious, it's more practical. It's actually removable with bolts as well if you need to clean it out or hose it out or something like that. Really useful feature. The backrest also folds forward, gives you access to a bit of room in the back there, putting in baby seats and that sort of thing. But something that the Ford cannot do is this. Little lever here between your legs, pull that forward. Now you've got a tilted backrest and a seat base that's moved forward. The GWM Canon Alpha does have this, by the way. It's not a first for the ute segment, but hey, it's a really welcome feature to have, because now I've got good amounts of comfort here. My back is tilted. I could sit in here for hours and not complain at all. You can't say that about a lot of utes in the second row. And because we've got a lot of space on offer, you can actually do it and not run out of legroom. So once again, that's my driving position up front, 1.8 meters tall, and I've got, as you can see here, more legroom than I did in the Ranger. Not a huge amount more, but a noticeable amount. So that is a good thing to have for larger people in the second row of this vehicle. Headroom, well, there's loads of that as well. And this cabin just feels much more spacious overall. It's because this vehicle is more slab-sided, the windows are more vertical on the side, the whole vehicle is more box-shaped overall. It gives you more space on the interior. Now we've got some cool features as well. So we've got air vents here, we've got a 240-volt household plug, which is nice, and then USB points, USB-C in fact, in the backs of the seats in front. Interesting spot to put them there, works well, no dramas. There is storage here on the back. Instead of a regular mat pocket, you've actually got a zipped kind of neoprene style material. Open that up, you can put a fair amount of stuff in there actually, and then zip it up so it doesn't go away. And you've also got another little spot on top here for maybe fitting in something a bit smaller. Pop down armrest once again with cup holders. This car really doesn't miss out on anything that the Ranger has, but it really adds to the game overall. Once again, this is a real benchmark in terms of the amount of space, comfort and features that you get. Now this Tasman is ready for work straight off the bat thanks to a drop-in tub liner, which is good, and I also like to see this plastic capping around the edge of the tub as well. Some cars have paint on there and it's really easy to scratch by accident when you're loading stuff in the back, so that's a bit more durable that way. The tub liner is good, and we've got a good array of tie-down points here, so one in each corner. They can be used for tying down in terms of rope, but also with ratchet straps and that sort of thing. Really smart design. And we've also got rails on each side with the cleat there as well, a bit of adjustability to shift things around where you need it. So that's really nicely set up straight off the bat. A little detail here, which is handy in this tub liner, we've also got these indentations here. So you could cut a length of wood and chuck it in there, and that'll give you a bit of a partition, which is a smart idea. And you've also got a 240 volt power outlet there in the tub, which is good to see, and it is weather sealed. Now, some people might prefer to have a 12 volt like you get in other utes. This has a 240. There you go. All right, let's look in the tub of this Ranger XLT. Firstly, we do have a roller cover here. This is not standard fit, but obviously you can get one fitted if you want. It's manual, not automatic. Let me just get it out of the way. Now that's a handy thing to have obviously, but also it does take up a bit of space towards the front of the tub, so just keep that in mind. Now we've got a drop-in tub liner here in the Ranger XLT. Now we've got 4 tie-down points in the back of this Ranger here, but 2 of them are really obscured by that roller cover up the front there. So once again, if you want to put a lot of stuff, tall, heavy stuff into the back of this Ranger, maybe don't get that roller cover fitted. We've also got a load rail on each side with adjustable cleats, really handy thing to have for tying things down in terms of adjustability. And we've got a 12 volt plug as well in the back here. No, it's not a 240 volt plug, but hey, horses for courses, 12 volt might suit some people a little bit better. But otherwise, there's a regular Ford Ranger tub, not a huge amount of difference going on here. I think it is well equipped for the asking money. It's definitely better equipped than a Toyota Hilux, for example. And finally, you do get some lights in the back here. They're not switchable, however, but at least they are there, so you know you've got a little bit of light when you're working in the dark. In terms of off-road specifications, both of these utes are similar in terms of their overall ground clearance in the real world. Now you will notice here that the Ford Ranger does have a lower departure angle than the Tasman, but that is due to the standard fitment of a tow bar. The major difference here mechanically is the auto-locking rear diff of the Tasman compared to the more common selectable diff lock in the Ranger. Now let's see which one of these utes has any big advantage off-road. Now it's worth pointing out that the Ford Ranger, in the grand scheme of four-wheel drive utes, XLT form, this isn't the most potent off-roader in the Ranger lineup either. You've got things like Wild Track X, you've got Tremor and Raptor obviously as well, but this is the meat and potatoes Ford Ranger. This is the bulk model that most people buy. So let's see how it goes off-road. Now, the beauty of a 10-speed gearbox is you've got pretty good gearing here, nice low range. Bit of a wheel lift there to get through. Doesn't feel too bad though. Now let's try out hill descent control. Wheel unloads there, but that's actually pretty good. This is keeping me going nice and slow down the hill. It's a good system actually, probably one of the better ones that you'll get in a ute. Coming down here doing 2-3 kilometers per hour. Nice thing to have if you're not as confident off-road as others. It does feel pretty good as well coming down the ruts here. Obviously the big test will be coming back up, but so far so good. No bottoming out. Bit of articulation available I think as well. Parking sensors going off, but there is a button to turn those off, which is really handy actually. That can drive you crazy when you're trying to concentrate sometimes. I am on the brakes here as well because those ruts are pretty big and I want to go nice and slow. Now it's worth pointing out on this hill, this is a hill that we often go to test out vehicles. There's been a lot of rain in Sydney recently, so while it hasn't rained recently necessarily, I can see that the ground is wet. It's got that darker colour to it and there is dampness there, so traction might be a little bit harder to come past as we're going up and over and through the ruts, but we'll see how we go. Now, one thing to talk about here with this Ranger is the fact that we've got a locking diff that is selectable. So I choose when that's turned on and off. That is different to the Tasman X-Line. So it's got an automatic locking rear diff. So what I'm going to do to keep things, I guess, fair, I'm going to turn off that hill descent control. I'm going to turn on the diff lock straight off the bat. Because that feels fair to me, I think. If you can't turn the Tasman one on and off, I'll have this one on as well because it should be an advantage. Now let's cruise up this hill. I'm in drive, I'm in low range. I'm going to go nice and slow. See how slowly I can get up here. Drop into the first rut. There we are. Doing okay so far. Just slip there. Scrabbling around. All right, I can feel from the driver's seat here that rear diff is locked, so it's doing all the pushing. With my front, I'm not feeling any traction control in the front there at the moment at all. So what I'm going to do, it sounds counterintuitive, but I'm going to turn that rear diff lock off and then see what happens. Bit of traction control kicking in there. A lot of wheel spin though. This thing isn't too happy. I'm going to reverse back a little and just go again from here. Alright, got up there, but was a bit of wheel spin, to be honest with you, which isn't really what you want when you're going up a climb like this. You want to be able to just crawl as slowly as possible. Now, the off-road traction control system in a Toyota Hilux, for example, is better than that, and an Isuzu D-Max, by extension, Mazda BT50 as well. So it's okay, it's pretty good, but not class leading. I'm locked up here again, so I'm going to turn that diff lock on now and see if that helps. Crabbing around a bit. See, in that situation, it did help because the ground was a bit firmer and a bit rockier, so the rear diff lock wasn't actually an advantage there. But the problem is you can't have the diff lock and the traction control at the same time. When you do, that's a lot better. This Ranger doesn't do it, however. So there you go. Ranger XLT up the test hill. Damp conditions, so a little bit more challenging than normal. I would say this is good, but not great. Let's see how that Tasman goes in direct comparison. Now's the turn of the Kia Tasman, and eagle-eyed viewers of our content will notice that this hill looks familiar, not necessarily from all the reviews I do of four-wheel drives, but the actual launch event of the Kia Tasman. Maybe they've been looking at my notes or something, but Kia actually took journos to this hill when they launched this vehicle a little while ago. But I will take a slightly different line to what those guys did. They went to one side which is maybe not as steep, maybe a little bit more manageable, I would dare say, and I'm going to stick to the way I like to go up, which is a bit more steeper and I would say a bit more challenging overall as well, just to really put this thing through its paces. Let's see how we go in this Tasman off-road. Bit of a wheel lift there. Now I'm in low range. I don't have all the fancy driving modes of the X Pro in this current model here. This is X-Line, so I don't have the off-road cruise control. I do have downhill assist though, so I can turn that on and see how it goes. Ooh, okay, it's not as good as the Ford one, I can tell you that. It's a bit faster. I can brake through it, but it doesn't seem to want to slow down as much. No, okay, I'll be using the brakes a little bit more here. The clearance feels good and stability feels good as well. These two utes are on exact same wheelbases, which is quite interesting. And weight is about the same as well. So this Tasman is around 10 kilos lighter, they reckon, than the Ford Ranger. So far, so good here. Now I do have the terrain mode button here on the steering wheel, but that only gives me snow, mud, and sand. So not necessarily advantageous for this kind of driving. This is more around ruts and rocks and that sort of thing. So X Pro has all those extra driving modes and more off-road technology. This doesn't have it, so it's kind of like the Ranger Tremor of its range, the X Pro, or maybe the Isuzu D-Max Blade, Toyota Hilux GR Sport, that kind of thing. This is the more regular ute, but it still needs to perform off-road. So I'm going to turn this thing around, see how we go going up that hill. Tasman does seem to have a better turning circle than the Ranger, I'll tell you that. But like I mentioned before, this has an auto-locking rear differential in the Tasman X-Line. Top spec X Pro has a selectable locker, which is a little bit more expensive, I think, and more complex to fit to a vehicle. Most utes do have the selectable locker. There are some like the SsangYong Musso, the Mahindra as well. They've got an auto locker like this one in the back, and what that does is, instead of you turning on the diff lock, it will sense wheel spin, and then there's a bit of a spool or a spring inside the diff itself that locks automatically. So you'll probably feel it while you're driving. We'll see what it does here. So I don't have to turn it on. I'm just in low range. I'm in a normal driving mode here. I'm just going to see how this goes getting up. Ease up here, nice and slow. Pick the same line. There we go. That diff lock just kicked in there in this sloppier sort of stuff, but it's starting to struggle a little bit already, to be honest with you. Similar to the Ranger though, I think. But I've got traction control working here. All right, that's done okay actually. Oh, that diff just kicked in then, I felt it, and now we're going forward. So it disengages and re-engages as it's needed. So you do have a moment of wheel spin, and then boom, it's almost like it finds traction and moves forward. That's the auto-locking diff working there. But the key here, I think, I'm actually making easier progress in the Ranger overall, I think, because the traction control system is working with the diff lock at the same time. So I'm getting a controlled front end and a locked rear end. After a moment, it's got to kick in though. So drive through it a bit, let the car figure it out, and then boom, off it goes. So you do have wheel spin there. I think a selectable locker is better as long as you get the traction control at the same time. That's the trick for me. But hey, this is pretty good. Got up there without too many hassles. Feels stable as well. Traction control there. It's just a shame that the diff lock keeps disengaging in between challenges and obstacles. This would be better controlled if that diff lock was on for a longer period of time. There we go. Up we up the rocks there. So there. Once again, I think this Tasman isn't the best in class off-road. It's good for clearance. I think it's good for stability. The X Pro would most likely be better than this off-road, absolutely. But I mean, you could say that about other off-road heroes and every other ute range, I think. So this is good. It probably made slightly better progress than the Ranger. There are advantages to this, I think, but there are advantages to the Ranger as well. So I think horses for courses overall, I suppose. This did better, easier overall than the Ranger on this specific challenge, but there will be areas I think where the Ranger would be better as well in a more broad sense. So I'm almost calling it a tie off-road, I would say. The Kia Tasman has a 2.2 litre 4-cylinder turbo diesel engine as the only choice across the range, which makes a Ranger matching 154 kilowatts but lags behind in terms of torque with 440 Newton meters. However, it's worth noting that peak torque is available across a wider range of revs in comparison to the Ford. It's available here from 1,750 RPM to 2,750 RPM. This engine runs through an 8-speed torque converter automatic transmission, which is borrowed from the now dead Kia Stinger, if you remember that sedan. This Tasman also has part-time four-wheel drive with on-demand activation, low range, and an automatically engaging locking rear diff. Now, while the Ford Ranger is available with a 3-litre V6 in this trim level, at more cost by the way, what we have here is the 2-litre twin-turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. Now that makes 154 kilowatts and 500 Newton meters. But that peak torque is only available in a relatively narrow band of revs, from 1,750 RPM to 2,000 RPM. Behind the Ranger's engine is a 10-speed automatic transmission with a part-time four-wheel drive system and low-range transfer case. At the rear, you've got a selectable locking diff. Next up is a test of the payload of these two utes. They both have over 1 ton of payload available, and we need to test that out to see how they perform. And we've headed to our friends at Nepean Landscape Supplies to load up over 850 kilos into the back of both of these utes. Well, you've got to take your hat off to the engineers at Kia, because this is a four-wheel drive ute, the first four-wheel drive ute that Kia has made. And it is right up towards the top of the class in terms of the on-road driving experience. Utes are always well known for having a bit of a stiff ride, not being the fastest, being a little bit cumbersome perhaps, and you do have that here still. This isn't like an SUV to drive, but for a ute with a big payload and a good towing capacity, this is quite impressive. Now, this spec that we have here, this is the X-Line with 18-inch wheels. It does give up a little bit of ride quality in comparison to the Ford Ranger. It just misses out on that extra dose of suppleness that the Ranger somehow has. And it feels bigger to drive. It's probably just from the shape of the vehicle perhaps, but it feels a bit larger through the steering wheel as well. Not as nimble, I suppose, as the Ranger. But the fact that we are talking about it being right at the top end of the class shows what a great job Kia has done with this Tasman. Now, loaded performance isn't as impressive overall. So we've got 860 kilos in the back of this vehicle at the moment, and the bump stops are getting quite a workout. Now, they're not as big and long and supple as the Ford Ranger. So when you hit bumps at full payload, when you hit speed bumps and that sort of thing, you do really feel that shudder in through the chassis quite hard. So it's not perfect in that regard, I have to say. But what's good actually is the powertrain. So this 2.2 litre 4-cylinder turbo diesel engine, it doesn't look that good on paper, but actual performance in the real world is quite good. Now this doesn't have as much torque as the Ford Ranger, but you don't feel like you're missing it from behind the wheel here. In terms of seat of pants performance, I think this is just as good as the Ford Ranger for real world performance. All in all, this Kia Tasman, it is breathing right down the neck of the Ford Ranger, I have to say. So even though the Ranger is better, I think, in terms of outright on-road driving, it's not by a lot. Well, even in a relatively rudimentary and the most popular form, this Ranger XLT is an impressive ute. Firstly, the powertrain. Everyone talks about the V6 being the pick, and it is, but that doesn't mean that this 4-cylinder option, 2 litres, twin turbo, is bad. It's actually enough engine for just about 90% of usages. I'm sure if you start to really load up with a heavy trailer, you'll appreciate that V6, but pulling around 850 kilos up a hill earlier, this had enough grunt to do it. It gets up to speed on road really well. It's responsive and refined and well managed by a 10-speed gearbox, so absolutely no issues there. And the other big advantage, of course, with this Ranger is the driving experience. This has the best ride quality out of the two utes by a decent margin. The Tasman is very good. This Ranger's just a bit better. And it feels a bit nicer through the steering as well. It's small margins I'm talking about here. And don't forget, these are four-wheel drive utes. Both are excellent. This is just a little bit more excellent, I suppose you could say. And we've noticed here in the load carrying side of things that with 850 kilos put into the tray of this Ranger, getting up towards the overall GVM limit, it performs a little bit better. Now, my suspicion is that along with having really nice ride quality and damping characteristics when it's unladen, the design of the bump stop in this Ranger just gives it a little bit more suppleness when that comes into play and starts getting a workout over bumps. It's not as jarring over speed bumps and potholes, most noticeably. So if you need a ute straight out of the box that's going to be carrying this kind of load, the Ranger might be the pick for you. But all of that Australian engineering in this Ranger still really shines, I think. Even though, I've got to say, this Tasman is breathing right down the neck of this Ford Ranger, this still feels like an excellent four-wheel drive ute in many regards. That did really reset the benchmark for what we can expect in terms of comfort and refinement out of a ute, while still giving off-road capability and good towing capacity and that sort of thing. It's all still there today, but let me tell you, you've got it in the Tasman as well, so this is a close call. In terms of safety credentials, only the Ford Ranger XLT gets an official 5-star ANCAP rating out of these two utes. Lower specification Tasmans do get 5 stars, but the X-Line and the X-Pro are effectively unrated. The Tasman has 7 airbags on the inside, which includes a front center airbag which is located between the two front occupants. The Ranger gets this as well, but it also gets knee airbags for the two front occupants, which means it's got 9 in total. I was surprised about how close this comparison worked out to be, with having a newcomer from Kia taking on the benchmark of the segment. But what's more surprising is the verdict, because Kia Tasman wins. You're probably not the only one that might be surprised by this verdict, because to be honest with you, this result kind of crept up on me during the assessment phase as well. Now, while this Ranger might have a slightly superior driving experience when laden and unladen, such advantages weren't enough for it to overtake the significant advantages that you get from the Tasman in terms of being a larger ute with more interior space, better value for money, and more equipment. Let's not forget that 7-year warranty either. The interior of the Tasman is a clear class above the Ranger in terms of quality, design, and comfort, and the second row in particular is a highlight. And while the Ranger might appear to have a more superior powertrain on paper, they are actually much more closely matched in the real world in terms of performance, refinement, and responsiveness. And similarly, off-road performance didn't see the Ranger run away with any advantage either. A selectable locking differential is a superior option to an auto locker in my opinion. Tasman's more persistent off-road traction control system really helped to make it work overall, and as you can see here, there wasn't a huge advantage between one or the other in terms of outright off-road performance. I've got to say, both of these utes are at the top of their class and are excellent on their own. It just so happens though, on the whole, the Tasman is the better choice. But there is a bigger picture here to consider. This verdict is specifically between the Tasman X-Line and the Ford Ranger XLT with the 4-cylinder engine. If you want the most grunt for towing and that sort of thing, well, V6 is king and you can only get it over here. And if you start to look at the different permutations of different trim levels and powertrains between these two utes, the verdict might shift from side to side a little bit because there is a lot of choice in between these two in terms of the trim levels, and of course they're both so close to each other in terms of performance. These are both very excellent four-wheel drive utes in their own regard. Just in this comparison, Tasman takes the win. Now, you might think that diesel power is king, and you might be right as well, but if you want to see 3 plug-in hybrid utes in a direct comparison, check out this video here. It's a cracker.